Picture this. You walk into a Victorian-era medical parlor, and a man in a fine suit, who calls himself a doctor, asks you to sit very still. He leans in, places his hands on your head, and begins gently pressing around your skull. A minute later, he steps back, furrows his brow, and says, "You show excessive development in the organ of destructiveness, and a worrying deficiency in conscientiousness. I'm afraid you and your children are predisposed to criminality." What you've just witnessed wasn't fortune-telling. It was phrenology, a 19th century pseudoscience so convincing, so seductive, and ultimately so harmful that it shaped medicine, education, hiring, courtrooms, and racism for over a century. This is the true story of how the shape of your skull became a weapon disguised as science. Phrenology was the belief that the human brain was made up of dozens of organs, each responsible for specific personality traits, and that these mental traits could be measured by feeling the bumps and dents on your skull. According to phrenologists, traits like benevolence, destructiveness, combativeness, veneration, or amativeness, that's lust, had specific geographic locations on the brain. And since the brain was believed to physically push out the skull as it developed, the size of each bump on your head could supposedly reveal how developed those traits were. The earliest phrenological charts divided the brain into 27 regions, though later versions expanded to over 40. The bumps were measured with calipers, drawn into maps, and interpreted like a spiritual brain GPS. Some phrenologists even sold custom-made brass helmets with labeled regions to perform self-readings. But all of this was built on exactly zero actual brain science. Phrenology began with Franz Joseph Gall, a German neuroanatomist in the late 1700s. Gall was genuinely intelligent and had a decent idea that different parts of the brain perform different functions. And he wasn't entirely wrong. That part of his theory, that the brain has localized functions, is now accepted neuroscience. But everything else? It goes off the rails quickly. Gall's evidence came from observational bias. He claimed that schoolmates with good memories had bulging eyes, so he assumed their memory organ must be located right behind the eyes. He noticed violent criminals often had thick skulls and prominent brow ridges, so he marked the area above the ears as the organ of destructiveness. In 1796, he began publicly lecturing on his system, initially called cranioscopy, but when it hit English-speaking countries, it was rebranded as phrenology, from the Greek phren, meaning mind or soul. Gall's system was later refined by Johann Spurzheim, who added moral elements and helped popularize it across Europe and the US. Spurzheim's flair for showmanship turned phrenology into a public obsession. By the mid-1800s, phrenology wasn't just a quirky theory, it was a full-blown social phenomenon. In England, phrenological societies flourished. In France, it became part of criminology. In the United States, it exploded in popularity thanks to the Fowler brothers, Orson and Lorenzo, and their publishing empire. From the 1830s to the 1870s, you could get your skull read at a fair, just like palm reading, buy personalized phrenological reports to help choose a career, find romantic advice based on cranial compatibility, order phrenological busts for your office or classroom, most famously the white ceramic heads labeled with traits. The American Phrenological Journal, run by the Fowlers, published more than 200 issues and sold tens of thousands of copies. Even respected writers and thinkers were taken in. Walt Whitman had his head read and published the results. Mark Twain sat for a reading and said the phrenologist told him he had the largest bump of humor he'd ever seen. Phrenology found its way into education, law enforcement, hiring practices, and even child rearing. Parents consulted phrenologists to decide which child to invest their time and money in. But the funhouse mirror appeal masked something sinister. Phrenology didn't just pretend to describe people, it was quickly weaponized to rank and dehumanize them. Phrenologists used the shape of people's skulls to claim scientific superiority of certain races, classes, and sexes. Using phrenology, Africans were described as having large amativeness and small veneration, implying they were hypersexual and irreligious. Women were labeled as more emotional, nurturing, and irrational, therefore suited to domestic roles and unfit for leadership or academia. Immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe were declared mentally inferior due to skull measurements. And phrenology's cousin, physiognomy, the belief that you could read character from someone's face, often accompanied it in racist handbooks used by slaveholders, police departments, and colonial authorities. One particularly gruesome example: in South Africa, skulls of executed prisoners, often black Africans, were collected and studied by phrenologists trying to prove a link between race and criminality. In the US, phrenological science was cited by defenders of slavery to argue that African Americans were biologically suited for servitude. Courts in the 19th century even heard expert testimony from phrenologists used to predict future criminal behavior or determine whether someone could be rehabilitated. Phrenology's fingerprints are all over the early ideologies of eugenics, and that influence didn't end in the 19th century. By the late 19th century, real neuroscience began pulling the rug out from under phrenology. Doctors like Paul Broca discovered actual brain localization through autopsy, like the Broca's area for speech, but they used real brains, not skull measurements. As psychology matured and neurology became more sophisticated, it became clear that skull shape does not reflect brain shape. You cannot isolate a single trait to one part of the brain. Head bumps have no scientific connection to behavior. By the early 1900s, phrenology was widely dismissed by medical professionals. In 1901, the British Medical Journal called it a dead science. Medical schools dropped it from their curricula. Academics mocked it openly. And yet, it didn't entirely die. Even today, echoes of phrenology linger, sometimes in chilling ways. You'll find apps claiming to read your personality from selfies. You'll hear about AI tools predicting criminality from facial structure. You'll see marketers selling products based on facial symmetry or mental mapping. In 2017, a controversial paper claimed AI could detect a person's sexual orientation from facial features. Critics immediately pointed out, this is just digital phrenology in a new costume. And in policing, algorithmic bias, especially in facial recognition software, has already wrongfully accused and arrested people, particularly people of color. The phrenologists are gone, but their logic, that you can reduce a person to numbers, to features, to measurable worth, lives on. Phrenology promised people easy answers. It told them that goodness, intelligence, and criminality were written on the surface of the skull, that you could know everything about someone by simply feeling their head. But the real damage wasn't in the measuring, it was what came next. People believed what they wanted to hear, that their class, their race, their family, their children were better, smarter, more deserving, because the science said so. Phrenology wasn't just a weird idea, it was a mirror reflecting our worst instincts, our need to label, to sort, and to judge. Let it be a reminder, science, when twisted to serve power or prejudice, can be just as dangerous as ignorance. If this episode made your scalp tingle, give it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Dr. Pox's Medical Mysteries, where we uncover the strange, forgotten, and often frightening corners of medical history. See you next time.